On the far edge of the northern coast, where the land ended in dark stone and the sea stretched without limit, there stood a lighthouse. It was old, taller than most buildings in nearby towns, and built from thick gray blocks that had survived many storms. The lighthouse stood alone on a narrow cliff, separated from the nearest village by several miles of rough coastal road. Few people visited it anymore. Ships passed farther out at sea, guided by modern navigation systems, but the lighthouse remained active. Every night, as it had for over 100 years, its light turned slowly across the water. The keeper of the lighthouse was a man named Elias Crow. Elias lived in the small stone house connected to the tower. His days followed a steady routine. He woke early, often before sunrise, and walked the grounds around the lighthouse, checking for damage from wind or salt spray. He cleaned the lenses, inspected the gears, and recorded weather conditions in a large leather-bound logbook. The lighthouse had never been automated. Local authorities decided long ago that it was safer with a keeper present, especially during heavy storms, when equipment could fail. Elias did not mind the isolation. The sea provided constant movement and sound. Waves struck the rocks below, seabirds circled overhead, and foghorns from distant ships called through the mist. One morning, while inspecting the base of the tower, Elias noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the cliff, partially hidden by tall grass, there was a wooden crate. It was darkened by water and marked with faded letters that were difficult to read. Elias approached carefully. The crate was sealed, but damaged, as if it had been carried by the sea and thrown onto the rocks below before somehow reaching the top of the cliff. He examined it closely. There were no warning labels, no signs of danger. Only a simple symbol carved into the wood. A circle with a single line through its center. Using a small pry bar from his tool shed, Elias opened the crate. Inside, wrapped in thick cloth, was a brass instrument. It was shaped like a lantern, but heavier, with glass panels that were slightly tinted blue. Along its base were small markings, etched carefully into the metal. Elias had never seen anything like it. He carried the object inside the lighthouse and placed it on the work table beneath the main lens. For several hours, he examined it from every angle, trying to understand its purpose. There were no switches, no obvious power source. But when Elias adjusted one of the small dials near the base, the glass began to glow faintly. The light was soft and steady, unlike the bright white beam of the lighthouse. It did not flicker or fade. That night, Elias decided to test the strange lantern. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, he lit the lighthouse as usual. The massive lens rotated smoothly, sending its beams across the darkening sea. Then, carefully, Elias placed the brass lantern near one of the tower's narrow windows. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But as the lighthouse beam passed over the water, the blue glow from the lantern began to stretch outward, forming a thin line across the surface of the sea. Elias watched closely. The line of light did not replace the lighthouse beam. Instead, it followed it, slightly below, tracing the waves with surprising precision. Moments later, a distant ship altered its course. Elias recognized the vessel. It was a cargo ship that often passed too close to the rocky shoreline. It turned earlier than usual, moving safely toward deeper water. Elias noticed the change in his logbook. Over the next several nights, Elias repeated the experiment. Each time the lantern was placed near the window, its soft blue light extended across the sea. And each time, ships adjusted their paths more smoothly, avoiding dangerous shallows without sudden turns or warning signals. Word began to spread among sailors. Some claimed the light felt clearer than normal navigation signals. Others said it appeared during fog, when other lights seemed dull or distorted. One evening, a small fishing boat approached the lighthouse dock, something that rarely happened. A fisherman climbed the stone steps and knocked on Elias's door. "We've noticed something," the man said. "Your light seems different lately. It's easier to follow." Elias nodded, but said little. He continued his routine, maintaining the lighthouse while quietly using the lantern each night. He never moved it outside the tower. It remained a silent companion, glowing patiently beside the great rotating lens. Weeks passed, and storms arrived. Heavy winds battered the coast, and rain lashed against the stone walls. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The lighthouse beam struggled against the thick fog. On the worst night of the storm, Elias climbed the tower with the lantern in his arms. The wind howled through cracks in the stone. The windows rattled violently. Elias placed the lantern at the highest window and adjusted its dial fully. The blue light brightened. Outside, the fog seemed to thin along the lantern's path. Not completely, but enough to form a narrow corridor of visibility over the water. Later reports confirmed that 3 ships passed safely through the storm that night, guided by the lighthouse when other signals failed. After the storm, officials visited the lighthouse. They inspected the structure, reviewed Elias's logs, and noted the unusually low number of maritime incidents in the area. They asked if anything had changed. Elias simply said, "The lights being well maintained." The officials accepted the answer. Years passed. Elias continued his work, and the lighthouse continued to turn its beam across the sea each night. The brass lantern remained beside it, unchanged and steady. When Elias eventually retired, a new keeper took his place. The lantern was never mentioned in official records, never removed, never studied. It stayed where it was. And to this day, sailors say that along that stretch of coast, the light is different. Clearer, steadier, as if something within the lighthouse never sleeps.